The first time I encountered what has become known as mixed martial arts was at UFC 7 in Buffalo, New York, in the early days of, well, before the company we know now. I couldn't have imagined that UFC would become what UFC is now in the 21st century. You know, I started out as a skeptic because I thought there was a limit to who would watch this sport. It's one of the most fascinating sports business stories of my working lifetime, maybe of my lifetime period. A sport that was built really from nothing, from scratch, and is now talked about sort of the way people talk about the big four: football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. It's in the conversation, in the mainstream sports conversation. That's never happened before. And the face of that, I'd say the brains of that, but there are some other guys involved, but certainly someone who is inextricably linked with UFC and its history is the boss, Dana White.
See you. All right, buddy. Good to see you too. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
If you didn't believe me 15 years ago, you have to believe me now.
Hey, it's good to see you, Dan.
You too.
It's been interesting looking around the room here. You know, this is the original, the original Bob Meyerowitz UFC, right? Back in the day. I was at 7 in Buffalo.
Oh, you were?
That's the first
no
one
kidding.
I saw.
That's
where
cool.
I started. A different world, though, man. It's kind of hard to line that up with where the company is now and where the sport is now. It seems like a million years ago.
Right.
But it's the evolution of it has been rapid and dramatic, hasn't it?
Yeah, we, the Fertittas and I, when we bought the company, we completely believed in the sport and, more importantly, the athletes. You know, these guys are really smart. I mean, if you look at how many guys they're still in the roster or have retired that are doing commentary or, involved in something on television, these guys are really talented, articulate people.
What did you see? What did you guys see, the three of you see, as the business proposition here? What intrigued you about it?
So when we found out, I was negotiating a deal at the time for Tito, and Meyerowitz snapped in the middle of the negotiation and basically said, listen, there's no more money left. There's no money, there's no pay-per-view. I don't even know if there's gonna be another show. So after that conversation, I was like, damn, this thing's in trouble. So I called Lorenzo and Frank, and they were in Miami at the time, and I said, the UFC's in trouble. I think we can buy them, and I think we should. So that started the negotiations, and a couple months later, we ended up owning the company. But we fell in love with this thing, and we used to say all the time, this thing could be so big if it was done the right way. If you did the right marketing, you presented it right, live and on TV. We always believed that this could be big, and I always believed that this thing could be global, that this thing would work everywhere, in every country, all over the world, that this could be big.
UFC, oh yeah, baby, all day. Yeah, UFC in Canada is the Sorry for swearing, but it is the best thing in the world ever.
It seemed to me there was something kind of symbolic. Again, if I kind of look at where this started, and saying, well, this sport's going to land on ESPN, which is still the people's go-to, in the United States of the sports, it's still their go-to. It is as mainstream as you could possibly be, and this massive commitment and partnership with the worldwide leader. Like, that seemed to me to be kind of the culmination of something in terms of UFC.
100%. And obviously anybody who gets involved in sports in the United States, your goal is to be covered by ESPN, let alone be on ESPN. And it's a big deal, and it's something that you got to do, and hopefully someday it happens, but you don't realize how big it really is until you're on it. These guys are very, very good at what they do. And now with streaming, people all over the world will be able to watch this. And this was my dream one day, where I say this all the time, but it's a fact. And if you didn't believe me 15 years ago, you have to believe me now. I don't care what color you are, what country you come from, or what language you speak. We're all human beings, and fighting's in our DNA, man. We get it and we like it. And now with this platform that these guys are building over the next 10 years, when I put on a fight, I don't have to go out and cut 57 new TV deals, right? The world will be able to get on ESPN Plus or however this thing's gonna, evolve and whatever. And the whole world can watch the exact same fight at the exact same time. And that's been my dream for years. And now it's all coming true.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd ever hear the UFC and Disney in the same sentence. I just did.
Right.
So
love to think about it. Well, if you think about it, when we bought the company, this wasn't allowed on pay-per-view. You as a grown adult didn't have the right to go in and buy it on pay-per-view. Porn was on pay-per-view, but UFC was not allowed. And now we're with Disney. So it's awesome.
It's a culture shift, man.
Yeah.
That's shifting a culture. That's a big deal.
You said that this is a really young sport, but even though it's very popular here in North America, why is that?
Why?
Yeah.
Because it's exciting and it's awesome and it's fun to watch and it's, I don't know.
What do you say about the future then?
The future of the sport? I think it's going to be big.
At the time when we were doing this, you had a media, all the media guys were older. These guys were all real old guys. Stick and ball sports was all they cared about. An occasional boxing here and there if it was a big enough fight. But we had to get in and try to educate these guys. And man, that was like beating your head against the wall. And all you had was newspaper. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't enough space. They were like, listen, even if we wanted to cover this sport, which we don't, there's no space in the paper for it.
But I was actually, it's great. I'm glad you mentioned that because I was one of those old media guys, right? I'm still an old media guy. I'm an old guy in the media, but
then you weren't.
Yeah, but I was working in the mainstream media for a newspaper as a newspaper columnist, and I remember, I always thought it was interesting that you guys kind of operated on two fronts in terms of the media. In one sense, you really didn't care about the mainstream media. You had your own. You got your message out through. You were the first guys to use the blogiverse, right? To actually go to the people who were intense about covering your sport and get to your fans through them. But you did have to kind of court the mainstream guys in places where you wanted to be regulated.
So here's what the strategy was. So what we did was, that's why we were first on social media. We were first with websites. We were first with chat rooms, and I would go into these chat rooms and talk to fans and things like that. But where we really, when you talk about mainstream, was radio. So you could buy your way onto radio. Right, you couldn't buy your way into the media.
But you were, again, I say this as a compliment, but you could be a different guy talking to, say, me as the columnist at the Globe and Mail when I was that guy, in the old square media, versus you when you were talking to the guys who covered the younger, internet-driven guys who covered this sport full time. Right. You could strike a different pose with the two sides.
Well, if you look too back in those days, right, I would do a press conference, right? Answer whatever. Then I would do a scrum after that would last an hour with the guys who had their video cameras and whoever they were. Then I'd do one-on-ones. So, yeah, I used to work hard with the media.
I remember
and I would get up at 5:30 in the morning and do radio tours for 2 hours. I do 2-hour radio tours that started at 5:30 in the morning, depending on which coast we were on. We used to grind hard. I used to grind hard when it came to doing media.
I remember coming here. There was and I forget what the boxing event was, but there was a boxing event, a UFC event. There were like a week, 10 days apart here, and I remember the contrast between the media scene around the fight, and then the media scene around the UFC. Totally different group of people.
Right.
Different vibe, very different vibe. A bunch of old newspaper dudes mostly, who had been covering the fights for years. And the other side was young. It was a lot of guys with little video cameras. Right. It was two different worlds. But that world worked for you guys, right?
Yeah.
You got the message out to the people you needed to get the message
100%,
out to, right?
Yeah. We spoke to the younger crowd for sure.
Yeah.
And then once social media started, I was all in on that. I was like, wait a minute. You're telling me that there's this thing that I can talk directly to my customer. Think about the days of websites. So if I wanted your information because I wanted to let you know I had something going on, you'd have to give me your email address and all that stuff. And then when we'd start hitting people back, people were using fake email addresses because they didn't want you to have their email address. Mm-hmm. But then once social media started, these people opt in to follow you that want to hear what's going on, you know? And this year, we just passed the NFL as far as social media followers, so.
Wow.
It's huge.
That is huge. I'll ask you a little bit, you know, I know you keep the business and private life separate, but just talk a little bit about who you were before you became Dana White.
Yeah, you know, I've always been in the fight business. It's all I've ever done my whole life, except when I was, you know, 18, 19 years old, and you have those jobs that you get when you get out of high school. But I made a decision when I was 19 years old. I wanted to be in the fight business, and so I went for it. And
now you're an East Coast guy, you're right. You're a New England guy. You came here. I've read the Whitey Bulger story. Is that the story?
Yeah.
How you wound up here? Could
Yeah.
you tell that story?
I grew up. I grew up in Vegas too. So when I was a kid, we lived back east, and at the time in like 1978 or 79, they were paying nurses more here in Las Vegas than anywhere else in the country. So my mother packed up the car, moved me and my sister out here to Vegas. And, you know, we grew up here. I moved back to Boston when I was 17.
Okay.
And lived there for almost 10 years. And then came back to Vegas in 1995.
Okay. Can you tell that story about how you ended up coming back here?
Yeah, so I you know, we had a gym that was underneath the courthouse in South Boston. And, you know, Whitey Bulger and his crew ran Southie. And there was a guy named Kevin Weeks, who was one of Whitey's guys. I mean, if you watch the movie or read the book or anything, you know who Kevin Weeks is. And I was teaching a class at one of the health clubs in South Boston. And two guys walked into my class and said, "We need to talk to you." I didn't know who they were. I literally walked outside with them for a minute and, you know, basically telling me that I owed them money. And long story short, I get a call it was a Saturday afternoon, said I needed to have the money, which was $2,500 by Sunday at 1 o'clock. I said, "Or what? Or you're gonna find out." So I literally hung up the phone, picked it back up, called Delta, and booked a one-way flight to Vegas. And a couple months later is when Whitey fled and the whole thing came tumbling down.
The great thing about this is, in this sport, we have guys that are going to make millions of dollars. We have guys that are going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you got guys that are going to make a few bucks, and then they're going to have to get a real job. That's the reality of life and of professional sports.
The other thing you guys did, and you know, and again, more, you created stars within your own system. You built guys within your own system. You know, you created the Ultimate Fighter to create a farm system for yourself, essentially. And you know, boxing is cyclical. You know, like if a Tyson comes and a Tyson goes, the sport rises and falls with a star.
Right.
You guys seem to have a succession plan as much as you could possibly do it, where you can't control the result, but you seem to be aware that, okay, we need marquee people here. You could do things that other sports couldn't do.
So let me put it this way. I have some stats here that I was goofing around with this morning. So Conor McGregor hasn't fought in a few years,
Yeah.
right? Obviously a massive star for us, and ticket sales and everything else. Total attendance, higher this year than any other year ever, right? We broke a ton of records this year. This was a record-breaking, massive year for the UFC. Total live event revenue was the most this year than any year in UFC history. UFC 243 was the largest attended event in UFC history with 57,000 people in attendance this year. We sold out 12 events this year. 24 events this year grossed over $1 million. And we set 2 new arena records in Prague and at the Honda Center.
And that's with your number
Southern
one guy
California.
essentially on the shelf.
Yeah, that's with our number one biggest star on the shelf.
Yeah.
We broke all of our records this year.
Yeah. So what does that say about the business and about the sport?
The business continues to grow. It continues to get bigger. It continues to become more global. It shows that people want to see fights, man. People want to see the best fight the best, and that's what we do here. You know how many times when I watch a boxing match, I turn the TV off and go, I just got ripped off and I wasted my Saturday night.
Yeah.
I don't ever want people thinking that when they turn off the TV after watching one of my events.
Yeah. But again, part of the reason you can do that is because, you know, it's not rival promotional worlds, you know, where they keep their guys apart, or because you you are the matchmaker as well. You can do
Right.
you can do things that they can't do in boxing.
But we also stack the card with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what I sell are holy shit moments, okay? You have to have a few of those on a Saturday night. And if you stack the card with great fights, with the best only fighting the best, you're almost guaranteed 100% that people are never going to turn off your product and say, I just got robbed.
Yeah, and that's hard to do in, you know, look, you can do it in professional wrestling because it's scripted, but it's hard to do in a sport where the outcomes are not, you know, predetermined.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did the sale change things for you? Other than make you considerably richer, congratulations, we all should get richer.
Yeah.
But other than that, how did it change things?
I don't know. You know, in the beginning, when we first sold, I was messed up. I'd been with the Fertittas for 25 years, and I was happy. I was happy with our situation and the business and everything else. The problem with the sale in the beginning is the unknown, you know? Ari and I have known each other for a long time, but how are we going to work together? You know, am I still going to have absolute and total control, or are we going to have a bunch of guys now, these banker guys, jumping in trying to, you know, matchmake or change the business or change the way that I run the business? None of that happened. Everything is exactly the same. So it couldn't be more perfect. You know, I would have never thought that coming to work every day and not working with the Fertitta brothers, that I would still be happy.
Yeah.
But I am. I'm
Now, I know,
very happy.
and you re-upped with them in the spring, right?
Yeah, so they came back to me, I think I'm 4 years into the new deal that I had cut, and they asked me to re-up for another 7. So we did. I happily re-upped for another 7.
What's this sport look like when you're not, this, you know, this sport as people know it, you are inextricably linked with it, right? When people think of the sport, they think of you. They think of the fighters, they think of the athletes,
Right.
but there has not been, other than the, you know, ancient history that we're looking at here, there's not been a UFC where you were not the face of it.
Right.
What does this, you know, what's the succession plan?
Yeah, well, I right now I can't see me not doing this. I love it, and it's not about the money. It's not about any of that. This is what I love to do. This is what gets me up in the morning. And the UFC is going to go on forever. Whether it's big stars, me, whoever, there's always somebody coming up, and this thing is going global. It's, you know, look at what we're doing in China right now, which is one of the hardest markets in the world to break into. We actually have a Chinese champion who is becoming a star over there. And the UFC will definitely be different without me because of the things that I do day to day and the things that I control. The UFC is here forever. It's not going anywhere.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I say pleasure talking to you again, man.
Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Dan.